This is a hotspot, which means that we basically talk in a rapid kind of way about what might be hot and what people think is going to happen and what's on their mind about what needs to be done about what might happen, that kind of thing. Again, a very, very diverse, eclectic group, very, very different backgrounds and interests, which might make for, an interesting conversation. I certainly hope so. Going from left to right, or your left to right, is Ricardo Salinas Pliego, who's the chairman and founder of Grupo Salinas, who, when I said that his company started in furniture, he raised his eyebrows as high as they'll go and pointed out that was 100 years ago. And that's fair enough, I take your point. Yeah. Anyway, now he's in big Mexican businessman into mobile phones, banking, telecoms, the media, you name it, he's there. To his left, Donald Jones, Qualcomm Vice President, very interested in wireless technologies and life sciences and healthcare. And then beyond that, from Australia, Simon Hackett, who's the CEO of an ISP there and has been involved in the internet since it started in that country, which is really a continent. And beyond that, Mark Foster, who is a design principal with Zimmer, Gunsul, Frasca, ZGF. And you've been involved in transit systems and pretty well all kinds of design. And then beyond that, David Morris, a familiar face here, President and CEO of EcoVerdance, a company which I think of as making magic manure. That's kind of accurate. That's kind of accurate, though, isn't it?
Snake oil.
And it's also, it is magical in the sense that basically it's making a product that you give away and yet you make money out of it. So there's a conundrum. There's something to talk about. Let's do what we did this morning. Let's go down the line and basically each of you tell me what you're doing and what you think your concerns are going to be about the way the world unfolds and the way your business might unfold. Go on.
Well, thank you. I'd like to sort of pull your attention a little bit from technology and all these high-tech developments and think a little bit about what's called the bottom of the pyramid. There's millions and millions of people out there. Since I come from Latin America, I know, but it certainly includes Africa and Asia, that are at the bottom of the pyramid. And they are lacking a whole bunch of things. What we're trying to do is close that gap and bring them into the modern financial system, which is much more than microcredit. It's also a payment system, it's a saving system, and in a way that's accessible to these people. These people also need to have internet access, so we're working with technology from Qualcomm to bring ubiquitous broadband in an accessible way to these people. And in addition to that, we're also doing a lot of social action. So there's things to do from the bottom up and from the top down. Just think about all the opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid to do good and to make good business.
Before moving on, let me just clarify one thing. Is it different 10 miles that way from the way it is here, or is it just a matter of more money?
No, it's very different. It's very different 10 miles that way. There's a lot more opportunities, a lot more things to be done in everything, in infrastructure, in business, in training. It's just it's a wide open space. I think there's a big difference, like for example, in Europe, everything's been done, it's been around forever. In all these countries, and certainly in America, there's been a lot of advance, but there's still a huge undeveloped market below the middle class.
But is it just a matter of getting people a bit richer and then it happens like it does here, or do you think in a different way?
I think it's both, but you definitely have to start thinking in a different way. For example, when we started our bank 5 years ago, and nobody thought it would be successful, there's lots of banks in our country. Well, it happens, we have 8 million depositors today, we have 8 million credit customers that didn't exist in the system. Why? Because we made a bank that is open 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, charges no commissions, and it makes it easy to people to have a savings account without losing everything in the commissions. So we created a new market using high tech and high touch, and it's there. Now, as these people move up the income, Sure, they'll be better customers and we'll do more things for them, but they're there already.
I was in Ghana about a month ago, and they are transferring credit on mobile phones. I mean, the kind of banking system is growing in a completely different way.
That's
very
really interesting.
sophisticated, clever people developing new systems from the ground.
And you know, we've looked a lot of that because we have a cell phone company and we have a bank, so it's natural to marry the cell phone and the bank account.
It's credits on your phone, isn't it?
Yes,
Same.
but you see, that's a thing that cannot be done from the carrier side. It has to be done from the bank side. And that's where all the regulation gets you. Major obstacle to getting people out of the bottom is regulation.
Okay. Donald.
Well, thank you. I'm spending my time taking principles of connectivity, applying them to create new services and products, specifically in healthcare and around therapeutics management, diagnostics and monitoring, basically to collapse time. So essentially, if you think about, if you add connectivity in systems that don't have connectivity, you can make things happen faster. And as a result, you can think about many, many examples in healthcare where things don't go very well. But this is applied, I'm applying these principles under kind of a theory of putting bodies and organs as nodes on the internet, and essentially taking integrated circuit technology and radios and instrumenting the body so that we can then ultimately collapse time.
Explain that to me.
Yeah. So my world is about sensors and applying sensors throughout the body, either in implants, in something we call smart wireless Band-Aids. In England, they call them plasters.
So what's a smart wire plaster or Band-Aid?
A biosensor or biosensors in a peel and stick package with a radio and processor on board that can then talk to another device, maybe a mobile phone, maybe another piece of medical equipment, maybe an access point on a wall in a hospital.
And are you developing this, or is it there?
It's, there are currently today about 50 different sensors available in various stages of clinical trials for the fitness arena, for the acute care arena, for monitoring for clinical trials. So I think we're there. We have some very interesting breakthroughs. For example, the ability to measure blood pressure without a cuff using just a system of Band-Aids on the body to actually impute blood pressure very, very accurately.
I mean, tell me the implications. I mean, I imagine they are substantial.
Well, if you look in the hospital market, the idea that you could actually be admitted to the hospital, have a few Band-Aids thrown on your body, and have all your vital signs, including something like blood pressure, which historically has taken something as cumbersome as a cuff, be puffed up, be automatically collected, the labor savings alone justify the investment in the kinds of these systems, because the devices automatically collect everything. On top of that, you have improvements in the clinical outcomes, you have improvements in therapy management and in safety. For some of you may not know, but an unmonitored hospital bed, at least in the United States and other developed countries, is the most dangerous place to have a heart attack. You're unlikely to be discovered in an unmonitored hospital bed. You're better off having the heart attack on the sidewalk outside of the hospital than in the bed.
So we are talking about a world where our health is monitored as we go remotely.
Yes, and we're going to see it not only in the healthcare, we're going to see it in the fitness world. Next month, Nike will hold their first worldwide marathon, global marathon, a virtual marathon. They're using the same kinds of technologies I'm talking about. Sensors in the shoes, wirelessly connected to other devices, in this case mainly iPods. But this is a very good example in the fitness world. Nintendo is doing the same thing with Wii Fit as being an excellent example. 1 million units sold in the first month of offering, essentially as big, if not bigger, than the iPhone in terms of rollout.
What's a virtual marathon? I mean, I could run a virtual marathon.
A virtual marathon means you run in your city on your route
okay.
against others running in their cities on their route, and all of your data mashes up together to form the virtual marathon.
I have to move my legs in a virtual marathon.
You actually have to work at it.
Oh, yeah, okay. Maybe I'll give it a miss. Simon.
Well, Stephen, in my situation as the CEO of an ISP, I'm in the crux of the same transition that everyone else in the ISP industry, or what used to be called the telco industry or the phone industry, or all of those things are smudging into a single industry, as we're all aware. And that, from my point of view, has a nice generic title of being the industry of providing content and interaction services to people. One way or another, it's essentially what we do. So we're taking electrons and finding interesting ways to value add them and interesting ways to change the interfaces on the end. but in trying to climb up the value chain from just being, as someone referred to earlier today, from telcos just being dumb pipe producers. Actually, the pipes we produce are remarkably smart ones, and there's a lot of challenge in that. So I'm thinking about those things in the next 3 to 5 years. Also, especially from Vinod's talk last night, thinking about the consequences on the planet of our particular industry and what distinguishes it versus an industry with a similar number of office workers. We have 300 staff. If there were 300 office workers that have a predictable footprint, the extra footprint for us is data centers. So we did an audit a few months ago, and we're actually doing offsets now, and we discovered that we chew 4.4 gigawatt hours of power a year as still a relatively small company in the scheme of things. And so that tests my mind about ways to usefully offset that.
I've got a bone to pick with you, and that is I'm married to an Australian, so I know that the Australian broadband system is the worst in the world, including Antarctica. So what I want to ask you is, what's the system of government that you need or regulation to make sure what happens in Australia doesn't happen elsewhere?
Oh boy, that's an interesting question.
Because you basically haven't got decent broadband there, have you?
Well, I again had to take a leaf out of Vinod's book. I disagree with you. And to produce the wrong conclusion, you have to start with false premises. Your wife may just have not be using us.
I've used it. I've failed to use the stuff.
Yeah.
I hold you personally responsible.
Yeah. Broadband works really well in Australia where you can get it. The challenge in Australia, as with a lot of countries, is not actually the speed when you can get it, it's accessibility, it's whether you can get it at all. The Australian government at the moment is in the midst of a rather complex and I think quite messed up process to try to improve that. It's trying to stimulate the right answer, but it's doing it without going to a long story. It's doing it in a fairly curious way. But it's
an interesting story because it actually illuminates maybe how you don't do it. Isn't it insisting that broadband goes absolutely everywhere, which means that it doesn't go pretty well anywhere?
Well, sort of. At the moment, the government's currently issued a tender, and there are 2 bidders for the tender, Telstra, the incumbent, and a consortium of entities of whom my company's one of, and the mandate is to produce 98% coverage at least 12 megabits a second, which is laudable at one extent, but yes, difficult at another in the sense that it tends to produce uniform blancmange. And one of the challenges here is to remember that the merits in some people getting much higher speeds is it's an inspiration to drag it out further. Yeah, it's a challenging time for us. The government is driving towards 12 megabits when they should be driving towards 1,000. And that's the real flaw at the moment, is that if they succeed, they'll actually succeed in holding us back rather than driving us forward. And that's frustrating, as we like building infrastructure as a company. That process may lead to one uniform kind of boring infrastructure instead of a whole lot of innovation. It's a bit tough.
Mark.
Well, we are in quite a different industry here. We're in the sort of design and construction of the built environment. At the broadest scale.
I think his mic's wrong.
Let me move on to David while the mic is sorted. Then, David, I was slightly flippant at the start, but there's an element of accuracy. It is kind of a magical manure that you've made, which will make you some money. Explain it all.
Well, I tried to put it in one sentence, and we have a business model that utilizes a relatively new, all-natural growth enhancement product that improves crop yields significantly to feed at-risk people and sequestering a large amount of carbon dioxide. And we've put this model into place in Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, and Burundi. And we just got back about a month ago, and we have 12 initiatives in those 3 countries right now where we're applying the product to rice, cassava, maize, vegetables, and things like this. And we're proving on the ground today that we can increase the yield by a significant factor for the people there that are starving to death. One of the problems that we've seen is that the people's income does not allow them to buy a lot of fertilizer, and today the fertilizer prices are increasing and there's shortages of fertilizer. And with our growth enhancement product, we're able to sort of extend the life of that fertilizer and improve the yields, which is going to be significantly important. There are 450 million smallholders of farms in the world, 3 hectares and below, and those are really the lifebloods of the small villages in the African villages. So we're trying to affect, foremost, the ability to grow food for subsistence for the indigenous people in the villages. And secondarily, we because of the biomass increase that we get is somewhere between 200% and 400% of norm. We're able to sequester a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide. So with that carbon dioxide, we're going forward with a clean development mechanism which allows us to trade CERs, or certified emission reductions. And that allows us to trade those credits in the open market as the market progresses. We'll monetize those, and then we're going to give a portion of that money back to the microfinance groups within the villages so that they can loan money to the farmers so they can buy more fertilizer, seeds, and plows. So
and this stuff, I mean, there's two things that jumped out at me about it. This stuff was first developed by or discovered by two farmers in Mississippi or Alabama who were basically hunters who wanted to grow the antlers on deer bigger so they could shoot them and it looked better on the wall. And they discovered this formula which worked.
That is very accurate. We're very fortunate
Strange,
that people were trying to grow feedlots or lots for wild animals to come and graze, and we found that the protein content of the grass was 20% to 30% higher. And what it allowed the animals to do is grow larger antlers. And it's serendipity. Lydia Davenport, who's here today, was the founder of the company, and they asked him if he could make a business model out of it. And he said, I think I can. I really think I can. And the formula has been perfected today where it's stable and has a shelf life of over 4 years, and it's a very active product to stimulate growth.
And the other interesting thing is that the business model is different in that you can give the stuff away and you then get the carbon credit and you can cash that in.
That's correct. We're actually looking for people who want to reduce their carbon footprint, of which there are a number of people that are looking at their carbon obligation on what they're emitting, and they want to reduce their carbon footprint. So we'll go to them or they'll come to us and basically buy carbon credits through us, and we'll take that money and we'll buy the Accelagro from another company, Accelagro Industries. And we'll give that to the small holder, the small farmer, and allow them to grow additional crops and yields. We're going to have on-the-ground people that we're going to hire locally that will go in and monitor the ability to put it on so that we have a track record of that. We'll have people that measure the amount of output so that there's no question about the certified emission reductions that we get from this. So it's a very good business model, and we're able to, again, monetize the CERs and benefit that.
Mark.
Okay, try again. Does it work?
Yeah.
All right. So in the sort of design and construction industry, the focus going forward, as far as we can see right now, is on issues of sustainability, of green building issues. And our view is that what we're doing is we're paying right now, and we will be for a while, for our success in convincing the rest of the world that our behavior with regards to transportation, education, consumption in every way is a model that really works, and they like it. And the big impact for us is we have to compete now on a much greater level, like with another 4 or 5 billion people, for investment, human resources and material resources. And there's a huge incentive in our industry in that construction inflation since 2001 has been 40%. And that does not count the fact that steel in and of itself has gone up 20% in the last 4 months.
So why is that?
Competition. That'll even out when there is more production built and there is more production capacity underway around the world. But it provides a huge opportunity, especially for us. Majority of our practices in the United States, there's about 300 billion square feet of buildings in the United States, and there's the expectation that there'll be, at a minimum, another 150 billion square feet built in the next 30 years, and 50 billion demolished and maybe another 150 billion renovated, so that in 30 years, there's 75% of our built environment will be new or renovated. Right now, buildings consume 50% of the energy in the United States. through, and that's construction, operations, and maintenance. If we can control that and reduce the demand in all these buildings by 50%, it's like removing the entire transportation industry, which is 25%, from the equation.
So how do you, I mean, I can see how you might do it with materials, for example, but how do you do it with design?
Well, there's a lot of strategies. A real broad one is called sort of creating the collective brain, where it really has to be an integrated design process to get building systems to work together to do this. And there's a kind of a fundamental concept that we try and push that's called net zero, so that you do net zero energy use, net zero water, net zero waste, net zero resources.
And what do you mean by that?
Your annual energy budget for your building or your site, whichever is bigger, is going to be the annual incidence of solar radiation on your site. Live with that. Your annual water budget will be precipitation that falls on your site.
Wow.
If you don't have a big pipe funneling waste into your site, you know, and that's why you decided to build there, you don't get to pump any out. You have to process it on site and return it to the environment. You build with recycled or recyclable materials so that you're never sort of depleting the bigger stocks.
Is that doable, or is that something which people think ought to be done? And when I say doable, I mean not so expensive that actually you wouldn't do it.
Well, what you want to do here is reduce demand. Generally, it costs only 10% of the cost to build additional energy supply to reduce demand. And so all of these strategies, and there are buildings that have independently, say, achieved a net zero water budget. Obviously, it works better where it rains a lot. And there are buildings coming online that are doing the net zero energy. Depends on the location. I think ultimately you'll end up having you've got the cap with the idea of net zero. Maybe there's a geographic trade that can be made to let the integrated systems accomplish this.
I suppose what I'm trying to get, I mean, is this a niche thing where you get fancy small buildings that'll win prizes, or is this a real technology for all of us?
Ultimately, it's going to be a real technology for all of us. I think a lot of it is not smart buildings that take really high technology. They're dumb buildings that are passive and require active occupants. You don't just set the thermostat and assume it's always going to be perfect. And if it doesn't work, you call someone, and 6 weeks later they show up to fix it. This is, you want to control the temperature, you can open the window, you can pull the blinds down. So you design floor plates that are thin so they're easier to naturally ventilate. You can get light in from the outside. You reduce your energy use because you don't have to have lights on all the time. You reduce your power use because you're not pumping air all around the building. And those are cumulative ways to reduce your load.
Okay. The clock is moving on. I want to finish by asking all of you, if in your own particular business or area or industry or whatever, whether greenery is something real or whether it's something that you feel that you kind of have to pay lip service to, or maybe a little bit more, or whether it really is going to change the way in which you do business.
Well, in the case of Mexico and certainly all the other underdeveloped countries, there's a strong feeling out there that the developed world has moved on and sort of indulged at will, and now we're going to be left to pay the price of that. So that's certainly a discussion out there. When you see the amount of emissions coming from the United States, Europe, and China, and compare them to the ones that we have in Latin America, for example, is negligible. But if that's going to force a huge increase in construction costs or in car costs, for example, I don't know if our people are going to be willing to pay for that. You know?
You make a good point. Let me put it to the forum, the four Westerners. Isn't that a good point? That suddenly we're looking south and we're looking east and saying, sort yourselves out, China, sort yourselves out, Mexico. And meanwhile, you can feel the fierce air conditioning all around, and maybe it's around here that things need to be done.
You know, we have real life examples we have to deal with on the QUALCOMM side. We've just finished 2 12-story towers that are at least 60% self-energy sufficient, and one of them houses our worldwide data center, so it's a particularly hungry building. But on the smaller end side, we are working very aggressively at cell phones that recharge themselves, and technology so that the cell phone actually essentially gathers energy and recharges itself. That's extremely important in the developing markets.
Is it enough? Is there a danger of us in the rich countries doing a little bit and saying, well, there we are, we've done it, we've solved it, and actually, until you feel it, you ain't doing anything? Simon?
There is a tendency, I think, for all human beings to act that way to some extent, but this is an issue which, as we were talking about last night during the conversation with Vinod, it's past a matter of speculation, or more accurately, the upsides of assuming it and working hard on it are much greater than the downsides of ignoring it. So we're doing everything we can figure out a way to do. There's direct things we can do, but we're a relatively small business in terms of being a power consumer or in terms of being a footprint creator. But rather like QUALCOMM, the trick is to figure out whether your outcomes can improve it. The space that interests me is with 1,000 megabit internet links, rather than 12 megabit internet links, you get high enough fidelity video, audio, and ultimately haptic and other sorts of conferencing that you might finally save the obvious thing by actually letting people do that thing we've talked about for 20 years and work from home for a decent extent of their time. The carbon footprint savings of, I can't remember the statistic directly, but something like 5% additional people worked from home. The footprint savings are enormous, not because, again, just the direct impact, but the indirect impact on reducing traffic jams, which is what really generates the carbon emission from the cars. So everything's kind of a stepping stone.
Mark?
If we can affect the sort of the net zero building and push that to then sort of a living building that's fully integrated in as an ecosystem, and then possibly even push that beyond to regenerative building that heals an environment as well as just houses a function. This is a fabulous economic opportunity for us to take to other places in the world. So I don't think it's just do it for us and then relax, because again, that assumes everybody's relaxing everywhere else, but they're not.
David, what do you say to Mexicans who hear Westerners, rich Westerners, saying, you've got to sort yourselves out?
Well, I think it's frightening. When you look at our footprint, it's 16.6 tons per year, and that's really the average across America. New statistics out today say that if we were to try to mitigate the carbon that we're emitting today, we'd have to go back to 1910 to 1920, where our carbon footprint was 2 tons per year. And how do you get there? You've got to get there through new technology and everything that's available today. So it's frightening to me for the rest of the world to look at us and say, what are you doing? Because you have a choice, and the choices are limited. We can either shift the responsibility to the next generations, or we can shift the paradigm. And we're choosing to shift the agricultural paradigm so we can change what's happening in the carbon dioxide model and also feed people at the same time. So I look at it where our company's trying to help solve 2 problems. And it's frightening to see the other people look at us and say, are you doing enough? And the answer is, we haven't done enough. We haven't signed the Kyoto Protocol. The world's looking at us and saying, well, it's your turn. So what are you going to do? So we can shift the responsibility to our children and our grandchildren, or we can shift the paradigm.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.